Reading with your kids.
Hola, niho, konnichiwa, assalamu alaikum, shalom, mahaba, moni moli wanji, namaste, jambo, bienvenidos. Hi, my name is Jedley, and this is the Reading with Your Kids podcast. We are coming to you from the beautiful neighborhood of Reedville in the southwest corner of Boston, Massachusetts. We're so delighted and so honored that you are joining us in our mission to help families grow closer through reading. Please be sure to subscribe to the show in the iHeartRadio app, on Spotify, Amazon Music, Apple Podcasts, wherever you find your podcasts. Our guest today is Sivan Hong. She's returning to the show to celebrate her brand new picture book, Avery G and the Scary End of School. Before we invite Sivan in to talk about Avery G and the Scary End of School, we want to let you know that this episode of the Reading with Your Kids podcast is brought to you by a way for you maybe to go back to school or at least continue your education. We know that if you're listening to the Reading with Your Kids podcast, you love reading with your kids. But we also know a lot of you dream of becoming a children's author yourself. And I'm guessing that when that dream comes up, there's another part of you that says, oh, being an author, it's so difficult. You have to find an agent. You have to get shoeboxes filled with rejection letters. Can my ego take that? Do I need to do that work? Can I survive? Well, I want to let you know that you can avoid the rejection letters. You can avoid the search for an agent and just dream about imagining holding your own book in your hands in a matter of months. It's possible with help from April Cox and her self-publishing Made Simple program. April has helped thousands of authors with her programs and services, and she has a special offer going on right now just for you. Get a free consultation by visiting her website, selfpubmadesimple.com. And before long, we could be talking about your fantastic children's book right here on the Reading with Your Kids podcast. Join us right now from the beautiful state of Connecticut. Our guest is returning to the show, and we're so excited to have her back. She has a brand new picture book out. It's called Avery G and the Scary End of School. Please welcome back to the show our friend Sivan Hong. Hey, Sivan, how are you?
I'm doing great, Jed. Thank you so much for having me back.
I'm excited to have you on. Sivan and I were talking a little bit about Avery G. Why don't you tell the audience what you told me about the book, please?
So Avery G is a story about a little girl who gets nervous for the end of school. And the end of school, we always think about as having spring fever, and everybody's so excited about summer and all the fun things that go along with that. But Avery G is part of a series of books that focus on neurodiverse kids. And these kids, like many kids, frankly, can get very nervous about the change that comes with the end of the school year. You know, what if their friends don't remember them next year? What happens when they have to say goodbye to their teacher that they love so much? And what's the new classroom going to look like? And is their new teacher going to like them? And school is so structured and summer is not. And that structure can provide comfort to kids. And so this book addresses all of those fears and allows parents and teachers to have honest conversations with kids about the feelings that they're having, and then gives them some tips on how these kids can be brave and overcome those fears so that the end of school isn't so scary.
I really like this book and this concept because I think it should be the start of a discussion that not only we have around kids who are neurodiverse, but also around every kid. Our current school structure was set up, the whole calendar is set up that we go to school from September until May or June. That was all created so that kids could work on the farm and harvest. And I know there are some kids still doing that. In fact, I talked to a young author the other day who lives on a farm. But 99% of the kids, they're not harvesting anything. And we have this And I think it's unfair to parents too. So kids are in school, and that allows both parents to go out and work, or if it's a single parent to go out and work, somebody's taking care of their kids. But then the summer comes, and now what are we going to do with the kids? And I depend on someone taking care of my kids. And on top of that, we have kids who are neurodivergent who need that structure, day-to-day structure. And if they go from school into summer camp, that's a totally different animal. And I think we're missing. I think we need to reshape things from the ground up.
Well, and part of it is that there's always a learning loss in the summer too, right? And unless parents have the resources to be able to provide their kids at least a modicum of academic support over the summer, those kids fall behind. And then our kids end up having to relearn for the first couple of months of the school year anyway. And so, summer in my mind is fun because I get to take kids to the beach and do all sorts of things. But there are things that we can do to make it easier for these kids to make it through the summer. And one of the things that I talk about in the book is this idea of a schedule over the summer. My kids thrive on schedules during the school year, and they have schedules in their classrooms, and they have schedules on their desk and even at home, so that this is playtime and this is homework time. But usually we never think about doing a schedule for the summer. So, here's what's happening at camp. Camps have schedules. They know when the kids are going swimming and when they're playing softball and all that stuff. And sharing those with your kids can make it much less scary because they know what's coming up, right? These things exist. It's just being mindful that the change is hard and that the information that you give those kids is going to be helpful.
Yeah, I think it's so important. Can you talk a little bit and help us get into the mind of a neurodivergent kid? Why is that structure so important?
So, as someone who is neurodivergent myself, structure brings comfort because what is hard in many cases is the unknown. I don't know what's going to happen. And if I don't know what's going to happen, then I can't prepare for what's going to happen. But if I have that structure and that structure is consistent, then I can prepare myself mentally and physically for what's to come. Oftentimes, Mondays are very hard for all of us, but particularly for neurodivergent kids because the weekend was different, right? And the weekend was full of all sorts of fun things, but suddenly is Monday going to be just like Friday was? Right? Like it's that fear of the unknown. So if you have a schedule that manages expectations, it makes that process much easier. This is true even for the youngest of kids. My children were diagnosed very early, and I would have schedules with illustrations on them, right? Even before the kids could read, so that they knew this is when we're having dinner. This is when we're playing outside. This is when I'm brushing my teeth, right? Complete with illustrations. And then they can feel like they have some level of control in a world that feels pretty out of control.
That's interesting because I think instinctually, and it's because I'm not thinking with the same brain that you're thinking with, that all that structure would feel very stifling to me. That I wasn't able to just, I'm going to brush my teeth now, and I'm going to read a book now, and I'm going to go outside and run just because I feel like going outside and run. So I think it's that Avery G and the scary end of school would be a really fun way and really important way for families to have that conversation to help kids understand we don't all think alike. We don't all experience the world in the same way for a variety of different reasons. And it's important for us to have an understanding of that and also empathy for others. And not that we're feeling bad, but that we're understanding that folks are looking at the world in different ways.
Yeah, it's counterintuitive, right? Because someone like me with ADHD, there's a typical tendency to be very creative. But if I don't have a schedule, nothing gets done, right? Like I need a way to structure my creativity in order for me to function in the world, right? And so creating that system allows me to be a functioning adult, right? Otherwise my kids would never make it to school on time. The same thing is true for my children and I've tried this, and again, I have like a data set of 2, but when I let them have a free day in the summer where there's nothing scheduled and they can do whatever they want, they're a mess. It does not feel comfortable to them. But if I give them a structure, and look, as they get older, they get to weigh in on what that structure looks like. If I give them a structure, then it creates a comfort and a sense of security, and then they can work within that structure, and it works, and it feels okay, and they can be productive. And productive meaning they can go play basketball or whatever that productivity looks like. And so, yes, it's very counterintuitive to think that having that level of structure is so important.
Yeah. Tell me, what was it like for you growing up? And certainly when you were growing, our understanding of neurodivergence is fairly new. And kids with ADHD early on, it wasn't looked at as something, there's a way we can add structure and help this kid succeed. It was, this kid's a behavior problem. So what was that like for you growing up before we really understood, and we still really don't understand, but before we had a better understanding of ADHD and the other neurodivergent issues that folks deal with?
So I, like many girls, I was not diagnosed in school. Even today, it's rare for girls comparatively to boys to be diagnosed with ADHD because it manifests itself differently. And so it's kind of easier for females to mask the symptoms. But, and so I was diagnosed as an adult after I learned that my children, both had ADHD, and I was able to really understand what was going on. And my husband laughed because when I told him that my diagnosis was, that I had ADHD, he's like, of course you did. Have you watched the way you empty a dishwasher? And I'm like, but now I have a piece of paper that says it. But in hindsight, I went through this period of feeling very angry because there's so many things I could have done to have helped me academically. And I did fine. I have a bunch of, graduate degrees, and I was a college professor and all this stuff. But there were huge pain points for me that I had to overcome that if I knew then what I know now would not have been so hard. And one of the big things for me was reading and spelling. I remember failing spelling in second grade with a big F. And to this day, I thank whoever created spell check, but I still have to change what I write because spell check can't even figure out what I'm trying to say. But I never loved to read. I hated reading. I couldn't focus on reading. I couldn't understand why people had this passion about literature. And then the audiobook came into my life. And even, back in the 90s when they were $50 for like the book on tape, I would still spend my money on them because I love books and I love literature, but I never knew that I loved it because I wasn't consuming it in a way that worked for my brain. And now, I go through at least a book a week, if not more. And I go through and I'll read new books, but I'll also go back and read the books I hated because I couldn't get through them because I was reading them in a way that my brain would not accept. And now I'm like, my husband laughs. I'm like, I love Steinbeck. And he looked at me, like, you too? I'm like, yes, because now I get it. Right now I can really enjoy the language and the feeling and everything that comes along with it. And I missed out on that as a kid in education. Right. And now I introduce my kids to audiobooks and they love to consume them. And every single one of my books, even though they're picture books, are available as audiobooks because people read differently. right? And how you get the word into your brain does not matter. Yeah. It doesn't matter if you're using your eyes to do it or your ears to do it or your fingers to do it. All that matters is that the word shows up in your brain and you consume it.
Yeah. And people have been learning through oral story for a lot longer than the written word existed.
Indeed.
Long before those first parchment papers were filled up, people were listening to stories, sharing stories, passing down knowledge with each other. And so, so anybody out there that's listening and poo-poos audiobooks that says not reading, you're wrong. You're wrong. I'm experiencing an audiobook right now by Tony Robbins. I think the physical book is about 800 pages long. It's a fascinating book. I would not have even picked up the 800-page book, but I didn't blink an eye when the audiobook, and I'm looking, it's like, 22 hours. I got that.
Well, and you can do it while you're in the car and folding laundry, and it creates an opening for reading where you normally may not have time to be able to do it, right? So for me, I'm the person walking in the supermarket with one earbud in because I'm listening to a book while I'm grocery shopping, right? Like I'm constantly listening to books, and what a great thing to be able to access. Now that our public libraries have these, and everybody, can enjoy books this way. And frankly, to your point, there's some books you would never read otherwise.
Yeah. Sivan, one of the things that you, as you're talking about your experience with ADHD and not being diagnosed and still being able to achieve some great success, I imagine there might be somebody listening saying, Sivan did it, so why can't every kid just pick themselves up and just knuckle down and get the discipline and succeed the way she did? I guess that's one way to look at it. The other way to look at it from my point of view is, well, why should we have to make them deal with that torture?
Well, and you want children to love school. You want children to love learning. That's how they're going to reach their full potential, whatever that potential happens to be. And by creating accommodations in school for kids, you're not giving them an easy out. They still have to do the work. You're just allowing the school system and the structure of the school day to meet the way these children learn, right? You would not say to a child who is blind that you can't read using Braille because you're not seeing the words with your eyes. I mean, that would seem absurd to us today. And so giving kids an accommodation where they get to sit in a squishy chair or play with a fidget toy, which as we're talking, I have one in my hand because it is the only way I can focus, allows them to achieve their greatest potential. And that's what we want for everyone. You don't want to look back in your life and say, well, what if I was able to do some of those things that I struggled with so much as a kid? Where would I be today? And maybe I would be in the same place I am now, but maybe not, right? And it's on us in our public school system, which is the foundation of our democracy, to provide every kid that chance to love school. And you don't love school if it's not designed to work with your brain.
Yeah. Other than the squishy chair and the fidget device, what are the kind of accommodations do we need or can we make for kids with neurodivergence? So
neurodivergence is a huge spectrum, right? And it manifests itself in very different ways for different kids. An autistic child, like one of my sons, needed headphones because the noise in the classroom was too much to bear. And he struggled because he didn't think the headphones looked very cool. So he would wear beanie caps or something, right, to be able to muffle the noise. Whereas another child who has dyslexia may need to learn reading in a different way, right? A more phonics-based approach to learning how to read. Or kids with ADHD oftentimes need extra time on tests or standardized tests. One of the things they do now is they let the computer read the questions. And people think that's, the kid can't read. And that's not actually what it's designed for. It's designed to slow your child down. Because if the only way they can get the question is timed on the test, then they're not flying through the exam because of their ADHD. It forces a bit of taking your time. And so there are these types of accommodations that are in place that don't bother anybody else, frankly, and that allow kids to thrive in the classroom.
Yeah. Yeah. One of the things I've heard over the years, it's, the whole idea, well, I did it, so why can't everybody else do it? Well, you're built differently. We're all built differently. And our current education system was established for people who fit you, for people like you. It didn't take everybody into account. And the schools weren't developed to really celebrate everybody. They were developed to help train kids to get a job in a factory and get used to sitting at a table or at a machine and doing the same task over and over and over again, with breaks in the summer so you can go out and harvest. I really think that we need to rethink education. So with that thought, if this were a magic wand, that I would use in my educational magic shows, if I would give it to you and say, Sivan, take this magic wand and wave it and change schools, make schools better, what things would you envision happening?
Well, that's such a hard question because I don't want to fall into the bucket of designing school for neurodivergent kids, because then you're doing the very opposite, right? And you have the same problem. The neurotypical kids are setting in a structure that doesn't fit them. I think what we want to do is have a school system that is far more flexible, right? And part of that is educating teachers that learning comes in many different ways. And I feel very fortunate that the public school system that we have in Westport, Connecticut, in many ways does that. They recognize that teaching those teachers how to be flexible and how to design a curriculum that meets all the different kids in their classroom is a priority. And so I don't think it's that big of a gap we have. It's an education problem because we have to educate teachers on the different ways to do that. But I think it's something that doesn't need the magic wand. It may need some extra resources. It may need some extra time. It may need understanding and knowledge, but I think it's something that could be achieved.
I love your optimism. I really do. But, and I think one of the reasons I might not share your optimism, my wife just retired from teaching for 30 years. She was a special needs teacher, and she taught in an inner city school system, which is very different than Westport. I'm very familiar with Westport. It's a beautiful community. The reality is the money that is spent per child in Westport and in my wife's district isn't all that different. They're very close to being the same dollar amount spent. But the money is spent in very different ways. And in a big inner city school system, there's layer on layer of bureaucracy and paying for things that never reach directly to the kids. That's something that we really need to work on, I think.
I think, but I don't think that's a neurodivergence issue.
Oh, no, not at all.
I think that's an equity issue across the board, right? That it's true, actually. Many times it's a higher cost per pupil in some of the urban school districts versus the suburban school district. It is not just a money problem. It's education reform, however one wants to frame it. This is a huge problem, right? When you look at some of the education lobbies, how large they are and how much money they spend, the system itself seems to have lost its focus on the child in many ways. And in my mind, this is going to be somewhat controversial, but focuses much more on the adults, right? And the jobs that the adults have. And school needs to stay focused on the kids.
I agree. Yeah. I agree. I don't think there's anything controversial about that.
I do think there are some people out there that would say, and again, teachers' unions are very important, and the work that teachers do, to me, is one of the most important things that are out there. But many people who are retired from the teachers' union still vote in union elections, right? Or the cafeteria workers who are retired vote in union elections. Those people are not necessarily thinking about the kids in their classroom when the system is structured that way. Mm-hmm. Right? When they don't see what's happening in the classroom anymore. And so there is some controversy around that. Mm-hmm. And this idea that we have to shift back to student-focused education.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I think it's so very, very important. I would like to see the day come where every kid has an IEP, an individual education plan, where you sit down and you just see, okay, well, this kid can function in a typical classroom and get by, but is that what we want? Or do we just want kids to get by, or do we want kids to really thrive and to meet their full potential? How much better would our world be if everybody were able to get and really flourish and really grow and meet that full potential? I think the world would be better for everyone.
Well, and it's interesting because people always think about an IEP as something that a special needs child receives, but the IEPs are also something that gifted children receive, mm-hmm. right? And because in both cases, the way the school system is structured does not necessarily meet the needs of the child. And you're right. It doesn't actually meet the needs of any of our children because it is so standardized. Mm-hmm. And so creating an IEP for everybody would be magnificent.
Yeah. Well, until that day comes, and hopefully it will be soon, but it's not going to be today or tomorrow. Where can people go to find out more about Avery G and the Scary End of School and all the great books that come from Sivan Hong?
Well, being the only Sivan Hong on the planet, it's really easy to find my website, which is Sivan, S-I-V-A-N Hong, Hong.com. And information about all my books are on there, as well as free teacher guides for any teacher who wants to use these books in the classroom.
Yeah. They'd be a great addition to any classroom library, a great addition to any family library, I think. Not only for families with kids who are neurodivergent, but for every family, because every kid is going to have a chance to become friends with a neurodivergent kid, and they should take the chance.
They absolutely should. I bet they're already friends with a neurodivergent kid. They may just not know about it yet.
Absolutely. We've had a great time speaking to the author of Avery G and the Scary End of School, Sivan Hong. Hey, Sivan, thanks so much for being back with us.
Thank you for having me, Jed. I love the conversation.
Please be sure to join us for next episode of the Reading with Your Kids podcast. Our guest will be Faith Goldstein. She'll be here helping us celebrate Passover with matzah means so many things. That's the next episode of the podcast. Want to thank the folks who made today's show so wonderful. Of course, I want to start by thanking our guest, Sivan Hong. Please be sure to check out Avery G and the Scary End of School. We also want to thank our sponsor, selfpubmadesimple.com. Learn how you can become a published author in a matter of months with April Cox. April has helped thousands of authors make their dreams come true. She can make yours come true, too. Want to thank my team, Fatima Khan, Rory Grady, Skylar Strauss. Want to thank my beautiful wife for all the support she gives me. Most of all, we all want to thank you. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us today. And as always, thank you so very much for taking the time to make the world a better place by reading with your kids. I'll be looking for you in the next edition of the Reading with Your Kids podcast.